When I received $50,000, my golden sister demanded to take it all. My parents supported her, but then I found out who gave me the money, and everything changed. My sister, Emma, and I graduated from high school on the same day, but it felt like we were living in two different worlds. She was always the golden child, an excellent student, always getting straight A's, adored by teachers, and fawned over by everyone. I, on the other hand, wasn't exactly the star of the academic world. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't failing, but I was more interested in sports than schoolwork. Soccer had been my saving grace. It's what got me a full ride to State University, and honestly, it's what kept me sane during those 4 years in high school, overshadowed by Emma's achievements. Our graduation day was supposed to be a big deal for both of us, but as usual, it turned into a celebration of Emma. She got the recognition for being valedictorian, multiple awards, and scholarships. My parents were glowing with pride. I was happy for her, but I couldn't help but feel like a supporting character in her story. When we got home, there was a surprise waiting for her. A trip to Bora Bora, all expenses paid by our parents. It was her dream vacation, and they were thrilled to give it to her. They'd been talking about it for months, but had never mentioned I wouldn't be going. That stung. I tried to brush it off, but the disappointment sat heavy in my chest. All I got was a simple card with "Congratulations, we're proud of you," scrawled in it. There wasn't even any cash inside, just a handwritten note. No trip, no gift, just words. And yet, I had just secured a full scholarship for soccer. But that didn't seem to matter as much as Emma's academic accolades. It was like my achievements weren't worthy of celebration. I kept telling myself that soccer would take me far, that I didn't need to be validated by them. But deep down, I still crave their approval. It's hard not to when you're constantly overshadowed by a sibling. The weeks leading up to Emma's Bora Bora trip were brutal. Our parents were buzzing with excitement about everything she was going to do. Surfing lessons, helicopter rides, fancy dinners. Meanwhile, I was left behind to watch them pack and plan without me. They never even offered to take me. It felt like I was invisible, just some extra in the background of their perfect family. When they finally left for Bora Bora, I was alone in the house for the first time. It felt strange, but also kind of liberating. No more forced smiles or pretending I was okay with being the second-rate kid. I could finally breathe a little. My best friend, Noah, had offered to let me stay with him while they were gone, but I decided to stick it out. It was summer, and I had my own plans before heading to college in the fall. About a week into their trip, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, there stood a woman I had never seen before. She was around my mom's age, with the same green eyes and high cheekbones. For a moment, I thought I was looking at a doppelganger of my mom. She introduced herself as Elizabeth, a cousin from the UK. I didn't even know my mom had cousins overseas, but then again, I didn't know much about that side of the family. My parents weren't exactly forthcoming with information unless it was about Emma's latest achievement. Elizabeth seemed nice enough, although there was something mysterious about her. She explained that she had been meaning to visit for years and had heard I just graduated. She congratulated me, asked about my plans, and we made small talk for a while. Then, out of nowhere, she pulled out a check from her purse and handed it to me. $50,000. I stared at the check, not quite believing what I was seeing. I immediately told her that I couldn't accept it. There had to be some kind of mistake. Why would someone I didn't even know give me that kind of money? But she insisted, saying that it was a gift and that I should use it however I saw fit. I was hesitant, but she was persistent. After what felt like forever, I gave in. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but part of me thought that maybe, just maybe, this was the universe's way of leveling the playing field. Emma had Bora Bora, and now I had something too. I thanked her, still unsure if it was the right thing to do. After she left, I sat there staring at the check for hours, wondering if I should tell my parents. I decided to keep it to myself for the time being. I didn't need another reason for them to swoop in and ruin whatever good fortune had come my way. When my parents returned from their trip, it was business as usual. They raved about how amazing Bora Bora was and showed me hundreds of pictures of Emma surfing, swimming with dolphins, and lounging on pristine beaches. I acted interested, but deep down, I just wanted them to stop talking about it. It felt like salt in the wound. A few days later, they found the check. I had hidden it in my room, but somehow, my mom found it while tidying up, as she called it. When they confronted me, I explained what had happened, how Elizabeth, the cousin from the UK, had come by and given me the money. Immediately, Emma chimed in, demanding that I split the money with her. She said it wasn't fair for me to keep it all to myself, especially since she had worked so hard in school. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't even her money to begin with. But of course, my parents took her side. They always did. They told me that if I didn't share the money with Emma, I'd have to find somewhere else to live. It felt like the final betrayal. I thought about all the times I'd stood by them, even when they blatantly favored Emma, and now they were ready to kick me out over this? I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my things and left that same night. Noah, being the great friend that he was, let me crash at his place. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them take away what was finally mine. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about Elizabeth and why she had given me the money. It didn't make sense. Why would someone I had never met go out of their way to help me like that? Something wasn't adding up. I decided to do some digging into my family history, starting with Elizabeth. What I found changed everything. While searching through old family records and asking around, I discovered a truth that rocked me to my core. Elizabeth wasn't just a cousin from the UK. She was my biological mother. Apparently, when she was 19, she had gotten pregnant and given birth to both me and Emma. But due to family pressure and financial difficulties, she was forced to give me up for adoption to my current parents. Emma, on the other hand, stayed with her. It explained why my parents had always favored her. She was their biological child, while I was just the kid they had taken in. Suddenly, everything made sense. The favoritism, the distance between us, the way they had treated me like I didn't really belong. Because, in a way, I didn't. I was never really theirs. I was overwhelmed with emotions, anger, confusion, sadness. I didn't know how to process it all. Part of me wanted to confront my parents and demand answers, but another part of me didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had hurt me so deeply. Instead, I decided to reach out to Elizabeth. We arranged to meet, and I was nervous as hell. I didn't know what to expect or how I would feel. But I knew one thing. I was ready to start a new chapter, away from the lies and favoritism that had defined my life for so long. Meeting Elizabeth, my biological mother, was surreal. I had no idea what to expect when I walked into that coffee shop, but I was prepared for just about anything. Or so I thought. My heart pounded in my chest as I spotted her sitting at a corner table, staring out the window. She looked almost the same as she had when she visited me at my parents' house, but there was a quiet sadness about her that I hadn't noticed before. Her eyes were softer, and I could tell she had been thinking a lot about this meeting, just like I had. Sitting across from her, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of me was still angry. Angry that she had given me up, that she had let me live with people who never truly cared for me. But another part of me, a bigger part, was curious. I wanted to know who she was, what her story was, and why she had come back into my life now. Most of all, I wanted to know what had really happened all those years ago. As we talked, I learned more about her life. Elizabeth had been just 19 when she found out she was pregnant with me and Emma. She was in no position to raise 2 kids, let alone one. Her family had pressured her to give me up for adoption, and while she had fought it at first, she eventually caved. But she had never wanted to lose me. In fact, she had spent years searching for me, only to find out that my adoptive parents, the ones I thought were my real parents, had kept my existence a secret from the rest of the family. They had told everyone that I had died shortly after birth, which is why no one, not even Emma, knew the truth. It was a lot to take in. The betrayal from my adoptive parents ran even deeper than I had imagined. Not only had they favored Emma all those years, but they had also kept me from knowing my real family. I felt a pit of anger and sadness in my stomach, but at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For the first time in my life, things were starting to make sense. Over the next few weeks, Elizabeth and I grew closer. We started meeting regularly, and I began learning more about the life I could have had if things had gone differently. She wasn't rich by any means, but she had built a stable life for herself. She worked as a real estate agent in a small town called Cedar Hill, about 3 hours away from where I grew up. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was honest, and she seemed content. As for me, I was still trying to figure out my own path. I had moved in with Noah, but I knew that arrangement wouldn't last forever. I was getting ready to head off to college in the fall, and I needed to decide what to do with the $50,000 check Elizabeth had given me. Part of me wanted to save it for the future, but another part of me felt like I should use it to start fresh, to build a life away from my adoptive parents and the baggage they had left me with. It wasn't long before life threw another curveball my way. About a month after reconnecting with Elizabeth, I received a call from a lawyer named Marcus Fisher. He said he represented a family estate and that I needed to come in for a meeting. At first, I thought it was a scam, but after doing some research, I found out that the law firm he worked for was legit. Intrigued, I agreed to meet with him. When I arrived at his office, Marcus explained that I was the beneficiary of a trust fund left by a relative I had never heard of, my biological grandmother, Elizabeth's mother. Apparently, she had passed away a few years ago and left behind a substantial inheritance for her descendants. Since Emma was still with our adoptive parents, they had hidden this information from both of us. But now, with the truth coming to light, the trust fund had finally been activated, and I was entitled to my share. The amount? $300,000. I was floored. I had gone from feeling like the unwanted kid to suddenly having more money than I knew what to do with. Marcus explained that the trust had been set up to provide for my education and well-being, but since I was now an adult, I had full control over the funds. The only stipulation was that I use the money responsibly and in a way that would honor my grandmother's memory. It felt like a dream. First, Elizabeth had given me $50,000, and now I had another $300,000 coming my way. But as amazing as it sounded, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. Money had always been a point of tension in my life, especially with my adoptive parents. They had never been particularly well off, and now that I had this financial windfall, I worried about what it might mean for my future. Would they come after me, demanding a share of the inheritance, just like they had with the $50,000? I decided to keep the news to myself, at least for the time being. The last thing I needed was more drama with my adoptive family. Instead, I focused on getting my life in order. I opened a new bank account, transferred the funds, and started thinking about how to invest the money wisely. I didn't want to blow it all at once, but I also didn't want to let it sit untouched. It was a delicate balance, and I knew I needed to be smart about it. Around this time, I also started getting closer to Elizabeth's side of the family. She introduced me to some of her friends and distant relatives, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a real family. They welcomed me with open arms, and it was a refreshing change from the cold, distant relationship I had with my adoptive parents. I even started visiting Cedar Hill more often, and soon, it started to feel like a second home. But just when I thought things were starting to settle down, life took another unexpected turn. One day, while I was packing for college, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my adoptive parents. I hadn't spoken to them since I moved out, and I had no intention of doing so anytime soon. But the letter caught my attention, and curiosity got the better of me. In the letter, they apologized, sort of. They said they regretted how things had turned out and that they missed me. They also mentioned that they were struggling financially and could really use some help. Specifically, they asked if I could lend them a portion of the $50,000 Elizabeth had given me. I was furious. After everything they had put me through, they had the audacity to ask for money? It was like they didn't even care about the pain they had caused me. They just wanted a handout. I tore up the letter and threw it away. I wasn't going to let them guilt-trip me into giving them anything. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with them. Despite my anger, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last I'd hear from them. They had always been resourceful when it came to getting what they wanted, and I had no doubt they'd try again. But for now, I pushed it out of my mind and focused on the future. College was a fresh start, and I was determined to make the most of it. I moved into the dorms, met new people, and threw myself into soccer. It was my escape, my way of coping with everything that had happened over the past few months. I trained hard, focused on my studies, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life. But as the weeks went by, I started noticing strange things. I would get random calls from unknown numbers, hang-ups in the middle of the night, and emails from accounts I didn't recognize. At first, I brushed it off as spam, but then one day, I received an email that chilled me to the bone. It was from Emma. She said she knew about the trust fund, about the $300,000 inheritance. She demanded that I give her half of the money, claiming that it was her right as my sister. She threatened to expose me, to tell everyone that I had been hiding the money and refusing to share it. She even said that our parents were considering legal action to get what they believed was rightfully theirs. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Emma had always been the golden child, the one who had everything handed to her on a silver platter. And now, even after all the lies and betrayal, she still wanted more. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. She and my adoptive parents couldn't stand the fact that I had finally broken free from their grasp, and they were willing to do whatever it took to bring me back under their thumb. I knew I had to act fast. I contacted Marcus, my lawyer, and explained the situation. He assured me that I had nothing to worry about. The trust fund was legally mine, and there was no way my adoptive parents or Emma could lay claim to it. But that didn't stop the anxiety from creeping in. I had seen firsthand how manipulative they could be, and I knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. As the days turned into weeks, the tension only grew. Emma sent more emails, each one more aggressive than the last. My adoptive parents even started showing up at my college, trying to corner me and force me to talk to them. It was relentless, and I felt like I was being hunted. I knew I had to make a decision. I could either keep running from them, hiding from their demands, or I could face them head-on and put an end to this once and for all. And then, something unexpected happened. Out of the blue, Elizabeth called me with news that turned everything upside down. Apparently, there had been a mistake with the inheritance. The $300,000 wasn't the full amount I was entitled to. There was more, much more. After further investigation, it turned out that my biological grandmother had left behind a significant fortune, one that had been hidden away in various investments and properties. The total value? Close to $2 million. I was speechless. I had gone from feeling abandoned and overlooked to becoming the beneficiary of a fortune that could change my life forever. But with this new revelation came even greater challenges. My adoptive family wasn't going to let this go easily, and I knew the stakes had just been raised. I realized then that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, control, and the legacy I had unknowingly inherited. I had a choice to make, one that would define the rest of my life. After the revelation of the $2 million inheritance, my life felt like it was spinning out of control. It wasn't just the money, though that alone would have been enough to shake anyone up. It was the weight of everything that came with it. My adoptive family wasn't going to back off, especially now that the stakes had been raised. I had a fortune, and they were going to do everything they could to get their hands on it. I spent hours talking with Marcus, my lawyer, trying to understand the full scope of the inheritance. The $2 million wasn't just sitting in a bank account waiting for me to claim it. It was tied up in various investments, stocks, bonds, real estate properties across the country. Some of the properties were in upscale neighborhoods in cities like San Francisco and Miami, and others were in smaller towns, places I'd never even heard of. My biological grandmother had been a savvy investor, and she had left behind a complex financial web that I would need to navigate. Marcus advised me to take things slow, to avoid making any rash decisions, and to carefully consider how I wanted to manage the money. He also warned me that with this kind of wealth, there would always be people trying to manipulate me, whether it was family, friends, or even complete strangers. I wasn't ready for this. I had just graduated from high school, and now I was being thrust into a world of wealth and responsibility that I didn't fully understand. It was overwhelming, to say the least, but deep down, I knew that I couldn't run from it. This was my legacy now, and I had to figure out how to handle it. Not long after, things took an even more unexpected turn. I received a call from a man named Greg Lawson. He introduced himself as the financial advisor who had handled my grandmother's investments for the past 20 years. He had been working with her long before I was even born, and he knew the ins and outs of her entire portfolio. Greg was an older guy, probably in his late 60s, with a calm and reassuring voice. He offered to meet with me in person to go over everything in detail. We met at a high-end office in downtown Chicago, where Greg was based. Walking into that office building, surrounded by people in suits and the scent of expensive cologne in the air, I felt like I was stepping into a world I didn't belong in. But Greg was warm and welcoming, which put me at ease. He had a way of explaining things without making me feel stupid, and I appreciated that. He laid everything out for me. The properties, the investments, the cash reserves. It was even more complicated than I had imagined. But Greg assured me that with his help, I could manage it all. He had a team of financial experts who would handle the day-to-day operations, ensuring that my assets were growing and well protected. Then came the real surprise. Greg revealed that there was a clause in my grandmother's will, one that had been activated now that the full inheritance had come to light. According to the will, I was required to fulfill a specific condition in order to fully claim the $2 million. I had to take over ownership of one particular property, a small, historic and located in a quaint town called Willow Springs, about 5 hours from where I was living. The inn had been in my grandmother's family for generations, and she had left it to me with the stipulation that I run it for at least 1 year. If I did, the entire fortune would be mine. If I didn't, a significant portion of the inheritance would be forfeited and divided among distant relatives I'd never even heard of. At first, I was stunned. I had never run a business in my life, let alone a historic inn in some small town. Why would my grandmother leave me something like this? It felt like a test, a final challenge from beyond the grave. But Greg explained that the inn was special to my grandmother. It had been her favorite property, a place where she had spent her summers as a child, and she wanted to ensure that it remained in the family. I wasn't sure what to do. I had my plans for college, my soccer scholarship, and now I was being asked to run an inn in a town I'd never even heard of. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this could be an opportunity to escape the chaos that had engulfed my life. My adoptive parents, Emma, the constant pressure, they wouldn't be able to reach me in Willow Springs. I could start fresh, in a new place, away from everything that had been dragging me down. After a few days of careful consideration, I made the decision. I was going to Willow Springs. The day I arrived in Willow Springs was like stepping into another world. The town was small, with a population of about 3,000 people. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the local diner was the center of social life, and where time seemed to move a little slower. The inn itself was a beautiful, 3-story Victorian building with white shutters and a wraparound porch. It looked like something out of a postcard. The inn staff greeted me with polite smiles, though I could tell they were a little skeptical of me, a young guy with no experience who had suddenly inherited the place. The inn had been run by a woman named Charlotte for the past 20 years. She was in her mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense attitude. Charlotte had been close to my grandmother, and she knew the inn inside and out. I could tell she was protective of the place, and I respected that. I wasn't here to step on anyone's toes. I just wanted to learn and do my best to honor my grandmother's wishes. Over the next few weeks, I settled into life in Willow Springs. Running the inn was harder than I had expected. There were bookings to manage, maintenance issues to deal with, and guests to keep happy. But with Charlotte's guidance, I slowly started to get the hang of it. I found that I actually enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about seeing the inn run smoothly, knowing that I was a part of its history. But of course, my life couldn't stay peaceful for long. One day, as I was going over the inn's finances, I noticed something odd. There was a series of payments made to an unknown account, dating back several years. The amounts weren't huge, but they were consistent, monthly transfers that added up to thousands of dollars. I couldn't figure out what they were for, so I decided to ask Charlotte. When I brought it up to her, she hesitated. I could see the wheels turning in her head, like she was trying to decide whether or not to tell me the truth. Finally, she sighed and sat down across from me. What she told me left me speechless. The payments had been going to a man named Paul Lawson, Greg's younger brother. Paul had been involved with my grandmother's investments years ago, but he had been quietly removed from the business after a series of shady deals came to light. My grandmother had kept the whole thing under wraps, but she had continued making payments to Paul, essentially buying his silence. It seemed like a dirty family secret, one that my grandmother had hoped would never come to the surface. I didn't know what to think. Why had my grandmother kept this hidden from me? And why was Greg, the trusted financial advisor, involved in such a mess? The more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became. I needed answers, but I wasn't sure who I could trust. I decided to confront Greg about it. When I met with him, he seemed surprised at first, but then he calmly explained that his brother had made some bad decisions in the past. According to Greg, Paul had gotten involved with the wrong people and had made some questionable investments. My grandmother had agreed to help him out in exchange for keeping the family's reputation intact. Greg assured me that everything was above board now and that Paul was no longer involved in any of the family's financial affairs. But something didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I started digging deeper into the inn's finances, reviewing old records, and speaking with people who had known my grandmother. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, one that painted Greg in a much darker light. It turned out that Greg had been funneling money through the inn for years, using it as a front for his own personal investments. He had been skimming off the top of my grandmother's fortune, hiding his tracks by using Paul as a cover. The payments to Paul had been part of a larger scheme, one that had allowed Greg to siphon off hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. I couldn't believe what I had uncovered. The man who had seemed so trustworthy, the one who had guided me through the complexities of my inheritance, was nothing more than a con artist. And now, I was caught in the middle of his scheme. I knew I had to act fast. I contacted Marcus, my lawyer, and together we put together a plan. We confronted Greg with the evidence, and under the threat of legal action, he agreed to return the stolen money. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought the whole thing would fall apart. But in the end, justice was served. With Greg out of the picture, I was finally free to take full control of my inheritance. The inn in Willow Springs became more than just a stipulation in my grandmother's will. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could build a new life on my own terms. As I stood on the porch of the inn one evening, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. I had gone from being the forgotten child, overshadowed by my sister, to inheriting a fortune and uncovering family secrets I never could have imagined. It hadn't been an easy journey, but in the end, I had found something more valuable than money. I had found my own path, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.